Because it also depends what court you're on, that you feel the noise and things.
So the other day with Alex Eala, that's been a talk.
I'm really happy to advance to the next round. Obviously, it's not.
2 weeks ago, Coco Gauff walked off a Dubai court having beaten Alex Eala 6-0, 6-2. Tennis pundits had seen enough. The talent gap was real, the ranking gap was obvious, and the conversation was already moving on. 17 days later, those same pundits watched Gauff retire from Stadium 1 at Indian Wells, clutching a left arm she described as feeling like a firework had gone off inside it. Scoreline sitting at 6-2, 2-0. Nobody had a word to say. What made that night genuinely extraordinary had very little to do with the scoreboard, though. Consider this. The BNP Paribas Open's most watched YouTube video of 2026 wasn't built around Sinner, Alcaraz, or any top 10 name. It featured a 20-year-old ranked 32 in the world. That is the weight Alex Eala carries into every tournament she enters right now. Close to 2 million Filipinos are settled across California, and this week a large portion of them turned a desert tennis garden into something unrecognizable. A takeover that genuinely stunned the sport, including Rafael Nadal, the man whose Mallorca Academy first handed her a racket at age 13. If this channel covers tennis the way you actually want it covered, subscribe before the next chapter drops, because the roots of this Filipino army go much deeper than Indian Wells. Rafael Nadal's academy in Mallorca, Spain, is not a place that accepts passengers. It is a facility built on the understanding that talent alone gets you through the gate. Everything after that is earned through repetition, discomfort, and a willingness to be broken down and rebuilt. When a 13-year-old girl from the Philippines arrived there in 2018, she carried nothing but a racket and a ranking that meant very little at that level. What she carried internally was a different matter entirely. Alexandra Eala had grown up in a country where basketball and boxing were a religion. Tennis barely registered. The sport had no major infrastructure, no global representatives, and no realistic pathway to the top of the women's game. Her family understood the risk of sending her across the world to train under one of the greatest players the sport had ever produced. They sent her anyway. The Nadal Academy's philosophy is grounded in the same principles that shaped Rafael Nadal's own career: physical endurance, mental resilience, and the ability to manufacture belief in situations where the numbers suggest you should fold. Eala absorbed every part of that system. By the time she was 17, she had climbed to world number 2 in the junior rankings, a figure that placed her among the most promising young players on the planet, regardless of nationality. The 2022 US Open Junior Final changed the conversation entirely. Eala won the title, the first Filipino player in history to win a junior Grand Slam. When she stepped to the microphone to address the crowd at Flushing Meadows, she spoke in Tagalog. The clip spread across Filipino social media within hours. For a diaspora community scattered across dozens of countries, many of whom had never followed tennis a day in their lives, something shifted in that moment. This was not just a tennis player winning a match. This was representation at the highest level of a sport that had never made room for them before. That speech, delivered without calculation or media coaching, planted the first seed of what would eventually become the Filipino Army. Eala turned professional and continued developing through the WTA system at a pace that suggested the Nadal Academy had done its job thoroughly. The transition from junior success to professional relevance is one of the sport's most brutal filters. The gap between the two circuits is enormous, and countless number 1 junior players have disappeared into obscurity trying to make that crossing. Eala navigated it steadily rather than spectacularly, building her ranking through consistent performances on lower-tier events, while the Filipino community back home and abroad tracked her progress with growing intensity. The real earthquake arrived at the 2025 Miami Open. Eala entered the tournament outside the top 100. What followed was one of the most extraordinary week-long sequences a young player had produced in years. She defeated Jelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and then the current world number 2, Iga Swiatek, in succession to reach the semifinals. 3 Grand Slam champions were removed from the draw by a player the wider tennis world had barely registered. Within 48 hours of the Swiatek result, the Filipino diaspora's relationship with tennis transformed from interest into obsession. The Miami Open crowd that week told a story of its own. Courts that typically held moderate audiences for matches involving players outside the top 20 were suddenly operating at capacity. Filipino flags appeared in sections that tournament staff had never seen them before. The noise level during Eala's matches became a talking point among broadcasters. She finished the tournament in the semifinals, but the result was secondary to what it had confirmed. This player was not a fluke, and her following was not going away. From Miami onwards, the phenomenon tracked her everywhere. At the 2026 Australian Open in January, the court assigned to her first-round match was overwhelmed. Fans who could not find seats stood wherever space existed. Tournament organizers faced genuine logistical pressure from a crowd that had not been anticipated at that stage of the draw. Novak Djokovic, a player who has spent 2 decades at the center of Grand Slam crowds, publicly acknowledged what was happening. Record attendance at any tournament, he noted, is a problem every event wants to have. A month later in Dubai, she reached the quarterfinals, selling out every match in the process. Coco Gauff, who beat her comfortably in that quarterfinal, stood on court afterwards and directed a genuine thank you toward the Filipino section of the crowd. The acknowledgement carried weight. Gauff was recognizing that Eala had brought an entirely new audience into the sport, filling a venue that had historically operated well below its ceiling during the early rounds. That Dubai quarterfinal result, the 6-0, 6-2 scoreline, was the number that defined the pre-match narrative heading into Indian Wells. 17 days, same 2 players, different continent. When Eala arrived at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden for her first practice sessions ahead of the tournament, the scale of the Filipino Army's California presence became immediately visible. Roughly 1.7 million Filipinos live in California, a concentration that the wider tennis community had not previously had reason to consider when constructing seating arrangements or crowd management plans. Fans occupied every available seat around her practice court while others stood at the edges to watch a warm-up. The tournament's social media team, clearly aware of what was materializing, posted a day-in-the-life video featuring Eala on the Thursday before her first match. By the time she played that match, the video had accumulated 94,000 views, the single most watched piece of content the BNP Paribas Open's YouTube channel had produced all year. Tournament executive Philippe Dor, speaking to the media during the week, was unambiguous. The organization loved the attention, benefited from it commercially, and had no interest in managing it down. Her second-round match against Diana Yastremska on Friday night crystallized what Indian Wells 2026 had become for the Filipino community in California. Fans began queuing outside stadium 36 hours before the scheduled start time, wearing fan club shirts and holding flags, with 2 additional matches still to be played before Eala would take the court. Delays pushed her match into the late evening. The temperature in the desert dropped. The crowd, rather than thinning, pulled on winter coats and blankets and stayed exactly where they were. When the final point was played just before midnight, Eala winning 7-5, 4-6, 7-5 in 2 hours and 43 minutes after saving match point at 4-5 in the third. The noise from a crowd that had waited through an entire cold desert night came out in one long, sustained eruption. A sign in the front row reading "Laban Alex, Fight Alex" in Tagalog had been visible throughout. Andy Roddick's assessment of the situation captured the mood of the tennis establishment. "A story you cheer for," he said, "because it is genuinely good for the sport." That sentiment was echoed across the industry as the week continued. The Gauff match on Sunday elevated everything to a different level entirely. Stadium 1, the tournament's main showcase court, was the setting, and the Filipino community in California treated the occasion accordingly. Eala had lost to Gauff badly 17 days earlier and came out playing with a controlled aggression that exposed every technical weakness Gauff was carrying into the night. Gauff, who had been leading the entire WTA Tour in double faults in 2026, committed 7 in the opening set alone. Her serve percentage collapsed under the pressure Eala's return game generated. By the time Gauff called for a medical timeout with her left arm, the first set was already gone at 6-2. The second set lasted 2 games. Goff, genuinely unable to continue, met Eala at the net and apologized. Eala had become the first Filipino player ever to reach the round of 16 at Indian Wells. Her ranking would move to a career-high 28th the following week. What happened in the post-match interview was arguably more significant than the result itself. Eala stood on Stadium 1 on International Women's Day, acknowledged Goff with genuine warmth rather than competitive triumph, dedicated a portion of her remarks to her mother Riza, who was watching from the stands, and then turned to the Filipino section of the crowd and addressed them directly in Tagalog. The moment circulated across social media within the hour, with multiple commentators describing it as one of the finest post-match speeches the sport had witnessed in years. Sports journalist TJ Manotok, who has covered Philippine sports for decades, framed the broader picture with precision. The country had been searching for a successor to Manny Pacquiao at the elite level of international sport. Not a replacement for Pacquiao specifically, but a figure capable of generating that same collective national investment, the kind where life pauses around a result. Eala, according to Manotok, had become that figure faster than anyone in Philippine sports media had projected. Rafael Nadal took a 13-year-old into his academy, ran her through a system designed to produce complete professional tennis players, and watched her graduate into someone who had beaten 4 Grand Slam champions before her. 21st birthday. Whether he anticipated the cultural dimension of what she would become is a question without a clean answer. What is clear is that the player his academy produced has done something the sport rarely witnesses. She has converted an entirely new country's sporting attention toward tennis at a pace that tournament directors, broadcasters, and WTA executives are still working to keep up with. The round of 16 against Linda Noskova awaits. A run to the final at Indian Wells would be the biggest result of Eala's career. The Filipino Army in California is not going home. If this kind of deep dive coverage is what you come to this channel for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter of this story is already underway, and you will not want to catch it late.